Hello, everyone. This week we have another video quiz on the issue of appropriate and inappropriate test prep practices, how to make test prep engaging, and strategies to identify and deal with test anxiety. As I've said before, high stakes tests are here to stay, whether we like them or not. But first, we need to define what a high stakes test is. After all, if the stakes weren't high, would we be stressing out so much? A high stakes test usually has some pretty serious consequences associated with it, like your driver's test. If you fail, you don't drive. My daughter failed her driver's test twice and believes the only reason she passed the third time is because her mother said a prayer to St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. Talk about test anxiety. I believe if she hadn't passed that third time, she might not be driving today. Of course, that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you live in the city. We've always had these high stakes tests in our lives. We all remember the SATs and what was riding on a good score. You all will face the same thing when you take your certification exams, if you haven't done that already. What you are learning in this course will be helpful in passing at least one of these, the Education All Students, the EAS. I have been inserting some low stakes examples of EAS questions, and there will be one, actually more than one, in this quiz. They're all good exemplars of reasoning questions. So that is one way you may want to prepare your reasoning questions for your selected response test is to have one big scenario and then ask 3 or 4 or 5 questions about that scenario. Just an idea. Some people have done that in the past. Because of the spotlight that NCLB, and now that's gone, and ESSA have shown on underperforming schools based on the results of state assessments, preparing students for these exams has taken on a whole new life in this state. We have had the high school Regents exams for some time, and many high schools, including the one in which I used to be principal, devoted 1 or 2 weeks prior to the exams reviewing for them. Local public television also had programs geared specifically to help students review for the tests. There have always been SAT review books and private tutors that you could hire to bone up before the test. Because these cost money, this is one reason why students from poverty are at a distinct disadvantage when these tests are used, especially for elite high schools or college admission. Now, through test prep, though test prep has infiltrated our schools all the way down to the elementary level, some of it's good, a lot of it's not so good, and a good deal of it is bad for kids or downright unethical. In this module, you need to focus on the big ideas of Chapter 14 in Popham. You need to understand the 2 principles of test prep and the 5 practices, which are good, which are bad, and which may be neither. Another interesting idea is Popham's 2 distinct definitions of teaching to the test. I've added a graphic that I found fascinating because it's from an article that was written in 1991. As I'm writing this, that's 19 years ago. It's a survey that was done asking teachers to list any practices involving the studying for or taking of tests in which they observed their fellow teachers participating. As you can see, the one on the bottom is in which teachers use a form like the test to prepare their students is by far the most frequently witnessed. Yet how many of us today feel that there's nothing wrong with this? I would be very curious to see this study replicated today. How do you think these numbers would change? The next slide is taken from the decision time scenario in Popham. The choices for a new non-tenured teacher are difficult. Consulting with a mentor is always a good idea. You might even want to naively ask, Mr. Pelkins, I'm confused. Are we allowed to give our students the answers on these tests? Now, Mr. Pelkins more than likely would get the message. Bottom line is that it violated the ethics principle, and eventually, if it doesn't stop, it must get reported. In Chapter 14, Popham gives his opinion on the 5 test prep strategies. 1 is outright cheating, 2 he recommends, and 1 that he doesn't. You can tell from this slide which ones Popham feels are okay and which he feels are not. Of course, I disagree with him on previous form test prep. I feel that in moderation, questions embedded throughout the year is an excellent way to get students used to use the question types without making it painful. I thought Popham gave us an interesting perspective on the commonly heard term of teaching to the test. Popham separates the phrase into 2 distinguishable parts. One he believes is okay, the other not. I like this graphic, which I took from Popham's chapter. It gives a nice visual of the right and the wrong way to teach to the test. I'm a fan, if I haven't mentioned this before, of Heather Wolpert-Gawron because, like Rick Wormelli, who we will meet in Module 11, is an author who is still in the classroom. She offers some test prep strategies that are a little different from Bunnell, who suggests taking a team approach for test review, using clickers for immediate feedback on multiple choice questions, using stress relief strategies every day, using internet apps, and offering morning study sessions. This slide shows some of Wolpert-Gawron's suggestions. I included one called Test Speak. Dr. Laura, who most of you know by now is my wife, when she was an 8th grade social studies teacher, she used to give her students a copy of an old 8th grade exam and just had them circle. This was in the beginning of the year. Just had them circle vocabulary words or words in the test that they didn't know. They didn't have to take the test. They just had to circle words they didn't know. She then compiled a list and created a word wall and vocabulary study using those terms. Her test scores were the best in the county. I've just listed a few of Wolpert-Gawron's ideas on this slide. I especially like the last one. Doug Reeves is one of my favorite educational consultants. He is often in classrooms working with teachers, so he is getting his hands dirty. In his article, to which you should connect, he recommends more writing as an alternative to test prep. Be curious to see how you feel about that. Salend gives us many strategies to deal with test anxiety. One of the things most often mentioned in the initial baseline survey or in the previous discussion board about large-scale standardized tests is test anxiety. Kids throw up, they get sick, they don't come to school. Yet there are strategies where we can relieve test anxiety. And in this slide, you'll see 5 of the several that he recommends. This next slide is my slop flows downhill metaphor. You can substitute whatever word you want for quote unquote slop, but I think you get the picture. In this session, I provide several articles on reducing test anxiety. This will remove the excuse that students can't take tests because they suffer from extreme anxiety. You can do something about that. And in most cases, some anxiety is not bad. So you now know what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing when it comes to test prep. Most of us already knew this. Being ethical or numbing the minds of young people is something that most of us know inherently, that we shouldn't be doing that. So my question is, what do you do when you have an unenlightened administrator who has never taken Dr. Tom's course and insists you get practice exam after practice exam? Popham recommends, and I agree with him, to get closer to the fire. Work with the administrator. I've had a student who's done that, took my suggestion and went to the principal and said, hey, I think there are better ways that we can do this. I mean, are you willing to have me talk at a faculty meeting? And he said, yeah. Of course, if he gives you a mandate, she gives you a mandate, you must follow it. But you can also engage in what I call subversive teaching. When no one is looking, do what you know is to be right. And then to raise the awareness of the administration through collaboration rather than confrontation in a faculty meeting. One of the worst things you can do is confront your principal in front of your colleagues. Take my word for it. I know. So whether or not you're a fan of large-scale state assessments, I agree with the above quote. Much like the opt-out movement, it is fashionable to say that these tests are useless, invalid, unreliable, and biased. However, they do have a purpose and can be useful if prepared for and whose results are used appropriately. So that's it. This should help you take the test. Remember that not all the answers to the questions are in the transcript.